And this is indeed who we're going to be talking to. And Dr. Greening, I'd like to start with you first, if I may, because we've done a lot of macro stuff this morning, and we've been hearing about these private credits in different markets. But they all involve being able to make difficult decisions under pressure, and definitely uncertainty at the moment. So what do you think the main principles are that people should be focusing on when they need to make these market decisions?
Well, it's an interesting topic, and I wanted to make some comments that are not just soft, throwaway, generic comments. I'm really going to try to tell you a few of the things that I've learned over the years. One of the big things is that most decisions aren't very hard if you have enough information and if you frame the problem correctly. And so I think it's very important that instead of going in circles, thinking more and more about a situation, put that energy into actually getting more information. Become very passionate about digging stuff up before you even enter the final stages of a decision-making process. And then the other point is, in terms of framing, you need to focus on the few things that really matter. In any given situation, there are a million facts, lots of things. What are the things that really matter? In my business, for example, the real value comes from trading more markets that are uncorrelated, breaking into markets like Turkish interest rates, or onshore Chinese commodities, or freight, or California carbon emissions. The thing that really matters is breadth. And so we put a lot of our resources into establishing breadth, okay? Even more resources than we do into the models that we use to trade it. The real value comes from that diversification. But that's just an example. But the key point in making decisions, really figure out how you can maximize your information. And then take that information and focus on the few things that will really matter to your business, to the problem at hand. I think that's a very good first principle.
So you've set the stage there. Peter, you've been the CEO of Apex Group since 2003, over 50 countries now. What about when there's limited information and it's hard to get hold of? How do you still manage to make those sort of highly uncertain, or make those decisions in highly uncertain markets?
Well, I think that's probably the biggest challenge out there. You think about how quickly the world evolves, particularly building big businesses from scratch. Yeah, we've gone from 2 people to 13,000 over that 20 years. And you've got to move quickly. You know, you can't be looking at PowerPoint being created over 6 months to then have the right information, to then make the right decision, because you've got to be quicker than that. So you've got to get the best information you can as quickly as possible, and then trust your team and your instincts to get it right, with the full confidence if you don't, you can fix it. And that's really how we think about trying to move quickly and evolve a business.
And being agile. So we're talking about the big decisions there, but I want to sort of reverse back into what you talked about there, which is the leadership. Because quite frankly, we all know that people leave bosses and all the rest of it. And when you go from a smaller company to a larger one, being able to scale those values, live those values, be that leader, to pull through hard times as well as good times is one of the most difficult. So Dr. Green, if I could point that to you, what's your personal definition of leadership, and how do these values work throughout an organization, particularly as it gets bigger?
I don't know that I have the perfect definition, but I guess I would say you have to have a vision, okay, and have a sense of where you're trying to go in some way. The second thing is you need to put together the team and the culture to get you there. And then the third thing, I think, relates to embodying values that will suffuse the organization. Everybody wants employees and staff and partners that are selfless, that work hard, that are committed, that communicate well, that are open, that are not part of a blame culture. We all want that. It starts with you, okay? There are plenty of jerks running businesses, but they tend not to be great businesses. You need to make sure that you're embodying compassion, open-mindedness, encouraging debate, working hard, You know, when you're running a company, you have to work hard the whole way. There's no resting on the beach, in my opinion. And so I think that that's my answer. Vision, team, and embody what you want to see in other people. Starts with you.
And I think, as you said to me previously, that stops this junk culture, which you get high turnover, and quite frankly, that's expensive. Plus, you train all these people up, and then they move on. So, how do you make them stay, Peter? How have you made people stay within Apex Group, and how have you built that distinctive, productive culture to grow to the size that you have?
Well, I think certainly it's about vision. You know, people need to follow a plan, and you know, as a leader, you have to be able to communicate what your plan is and the steps towards achieving it. You also, as a leader, have to set the pace of the business. You set the tone and the ethics and culture within that business in terms of what you want to achieve. But most importantly now, it's about actually having a message which inspires younger people to want to be on that journey. And we have a lot of people aged between 25 and 40, and you can't just say, come here, you know, get a good bonus and enjoy working here. You have to have a stronger message and stronger ethics. And a lot of it is about ESG and how that evolves now. And we're trying to be a business which actually is not just about being a good business, but a purpose. And people want to follow a purpose, giving back, having a lot of CSR programs locally in all our offices, inspiring them to make a difference in their communities. And that's what the journey they want to follow. So you have to have something stronger than just being a good business. And even being a good leader, you have to have actually vision as to what they want to be following.
Yeah, and as you said, you know, it isn't just, and we saw this particularly during COVID, the flexible working practices that we didn't imagine were even possible beforehand, this lack of trust to employees to send them home and imagine that they were going to work. It kind of changed a lot of mindsets. What did it do for you, Doug, in terms of post-COVID now? Have you seen any major changes in the way that you think companies should be led, and maybe that you lead your own?
I think the work from home flexibility at first was a kind of a refreshing change for many people. And it worked for some companies. Those companies where the employees have a big stake and a real sense of ownership about their jobs. That's the case at my firm. We're not a huge firm. And so everybody, it's all very well integrated and people have a lot of that buy-in. It worked pretty well. Less well for some larger firms. The larger you are, the harder I think that is culturally. However, I think it still works better having everybody in the office and communicating. There's nothing like face-to-face interaction. And Teams is better than nothing. Zoom is better than nothing. But it's not as good as walking over to someone's desk or having impromptu conversations in the office. In both London and Abu Dhabi, where we have equally sized operations, we now have everybody back in the office. And I would say, you know, things are in a very, very great place with respect to productivity. But I kind of think the work from home thing, I think there's a drift back to the office. Not, in my cases, they're back. But I think in other places they're coming back gradually, and I think that's good.
Peter, you're nodding away. What's been your approach?
Yeah, it's been very difficult, you know, when you suddenly have to turn from fully in the office to fully not, and then still deliver services to clients around the world. And then we've moved back slowly into 3 in the office and 2 not. But I think you're giving up that a lot by not being fully back in the office. You're giving up that team spirit, camaraderie, training, mentoring. And ultimately, the trade-off is, you know, you're not at capacity as a business. And also, you're going to have higher staff turnover because they're missing out on that training and that brand identity and not following that, I suppose, positive vision you're trying to put forward. But it is hard. You know, if your competitors aren't doing the same thing as you get arbitraged and then you lose staff. So most of the banks that we compete with are fully back into the office. And I think that's a good example that many other people will follow.
So, Doug, I want to come back and talk about scalability. As you said, you had a smaller operation. It's still not small. But sometimes it's easier. A lot of people here may be part of startups or bigger organizations. But how do you maintain those values? And how do you keep everything together? How do you stack it together so that, you know, you don't lose sight of the very thing that attracted people to an organization?
Well, it's hard. For one thing, I tend to be a believer in lean, small to medium-sized, super specialized organizations that do particular things really well. So in general, there's a case for organizations of that kind. But some businesses naturally scale. And I think the trick, what I saw at Goldman Sachs when I was there in its heyday before it became a public company, what I did when I was at Greenwich Capital Markets and ran a couple of divisions, is you break it up into a bunch of small organizations. And so then you have these groups of 20 or 30 with a manager in charge and these teams. And it has that small organization feel. And then the trick is to get those segments, those squads, if you will, acting like a battalion. Forgive me if my military parlance isn't up to par, but acting well as a group. And again, a lot of care must be taken because you need sort of very good people and very good communication at each level so that the whole thing coheres.
Yeah, I spend my life going into organizations talking about communication and getting that logjam that where things get stuck sometimes in middle management. Peter, has that been your experience as well? Because as you say, that communication, it sounds super, super simple, but often the information gets stuck into those silos. So it sounds great to stack, but not when stacks become silos.
No, I completely agree. You know, I idealistically thought 30 to 40 people would be perfect. And I have this little map somewhere of all these offices with 30 or 40 people being ideal to be able to have that client service and the communication and be inspirational to your staff. As you scale bigger than that, you know, the problem is harder to solve. And you know, at 13,000 people, that's a lot of 30 or 40 offices, and that becomes inefficient and creates other problems. So, but even though we've got lots of locations in places like India, we have smaller locations of 300 or 400 people rather than one office of 5,000 people. So still believe in the principle and this communication and trying to solve the problem as you scale. But it's really important to be able to just communicate and actually be in touch with staff throughout your organization, not just your leadership team, but even the lowest level of staff in whatever office it is. It's very important to communicate with them, see how they're feeling, and then you could get better insights as to how to run the business.
And I think that whole sort of feeling, people are getting much more accustomed to that when they used to check in with people, particularly when we were more online. They forgot to just ask them about what they needed to do. They needed to check in how they were as well. And hopefully that's a legacy, again, that's been slightly left over. I want to use the last 2 minutes to talk on strategy, which is the final piece of the puzzle on all of this. And Doug, when we talk about all these values, the leadership styles, the ways to run organizations, how does all of that pull into strategy to make sure that everything's going in the right direction?
Well, I think that second item or that first item in leadership, where you say, where are we trying to go? You know, what's our plan? What are we trying to achieve? I think the thing here is we need to recognize that the world is in a constant state of change. Ray Dalio's presentations and points on this are very much on point. The world is changing. And the thing that was true today or has been true in the past, you need to be looking forward, seeing where the world is heading, and to make your best guess. You're never going to have absolutely certain information, but you can often make pretty good guesses about where the world is going to head over the next 10 or 20 years. We sort of know that the unipolarity of the American moment in, let's say, 1995, we're not even there now. We're moving toward a multipolar world. We know this region, for example, is going to be very, very important. That's why we have so many people coming for Abu Dhabi Finance Week, among other reasons. So trying to get a sense of the big macro trends in the world, accepting the uncomfortable truth that the world is changing, and that the certitudes of the past aren't really certitudes for the future. That's where I think you can get some vision and try to spot where you want to be. I mean, my 2 cents on the subject.
Peter, strategy, in my experience, people often get carried away and make it incredibly complex. And sometimes they're not honest about they're all obsessed with where we're going to, but they're not honest about where are we now in terms of resource, capability, training, and all the rest of it. So how do you sort of tackle not only the big external factors, but the internal factors that can prohibit strategy going forward?
Well, I think as you're moving forward, the dynamics are ever changing, and if you can't change quickly and have an agile business these days, you're going to get left behind. And it's to be able to live that with your team, but also be able to think about where you need to be in 3 years and try and be there in 1 year. And as you said, Doug, where the world is changing and growing, you want to be there as well, and not just stick with the plan that worked before. So it's going to change really quickly, especially the technology in terms of what we do, which is asset servicing. And you've got to innovate faster than your competitors. It's all about revenue growth and then cash flow positive. And those are all the key themes you've got to make sure you keep your eye on.
So remain agile. Look after your stacks, make sure that they're communicating, and obviously have a good set of values and a vision to follow. On that note, we'll leave it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Peter Hughes, founder and CEO of Apex Group, and Dr. Douglas Greening, Group CEO and CIO of Florin Court Capital. Thank you so much for joining me today.